All right, so pilgrimages. So last week we were talking about Canterbury, and actually we didn't finish Canterbury. We talked about Thomas Becket, and of course, I mean, I think all of you here are. Rob, are you a cradle Episcopalian?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. Yeah, I think everybody here is except me.
I'm not.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
Well, I was raised in true faith. I was raised Southern Baptist. So.
Okay. Okay. How about you, Jen?
Cradle generations.
Wow. Cool. You know, when I was doing my genetic research, I discovered I had a couple of priests in my ancestry, Episcopalian priests, which is cool. But I didn't grow up in the Episcopalian church, but it immediately appealed to me and found that this is where I belong. So so we were talking about Thomas Becket last week, and everybody except for me and Bud probably grew up with the stories of Thomas Becket, and I learned about him when I went to Canterbury and just found it absolutely intriguing. What an amazing story. But that was last. But now, as far as a pilgrimage to Canterbury, so Thomas Becket's not the only story that Canterbury has, and here's another great one: Monk Gregory of Rome. And so we'll talk about Gregory. In the 580s, this monk of Rome, Monk Gregory, he was impressed with what he called angelic angles, which was an intentional pun that he made, because they had angles from England or from the UK, from the British Isles, that were down there in the Rome area, who were slaves. Of course, all y'all know, St. Patrick was a slave. The Vikings and Picts liked to capture angles and sell them as slaves. If you look at Renaissance paintings, we'll see the angels are often depicted as fair-skinned and light hair, blonde hair or red hair, and they were somewhat patterned after the angles. If you think about the Middle East and Rome, people tend to be dark-skinned, or at least dark complexion and dark hair, and so blonde hair and red hair was kind of exotic to them, and they were often depicted as angels. And so Monk Gregory of Rome made this pun, called them angelic angels, and he was fascinated with them, and he tried to get a missionary trips to England. And this always fascinates me too, is that, as you all know, Christianity was in the British Isles from the beginning. We're not even sure how early on, but stories and legends have it right from the beginning. Even some of the original people who knew Jesus personally made it to England in their missionary trips. And so Christianity was in the British Isles, but thanks to the Saxon and British invasions from northern Germany, that was suppressed and driven back into the west and the north, and paganism was brought back to England. But Christianity was always there, and so the Roman Catholic centricity, if there was a thought process that existed at times. If you were Roman Catholic, then there was no Christianity there. So they made an effort to convert or evangelize the British Isles, even though there was still a church there. And Monk Gregory tried several times to arrange a missionary trip, but couldn't get one together. So he was fascinated with these slaves that were angles from the British Isles, and wanted to get up there and bring the church there. but he couldn't get a missionary trip together. But then he becomes Pope. So monk Gregory becomes Saint Gregory the Great. So Pope Gregory, as in Gregorian chants or the Gregorian calendar. So once he was Pope, of course, he was able to get his missionary trips to England. And,
How did he become a pope as a monk? Or,
well,
I guess monks are priests too, I guess, huh?
right. Well, he was, at least. So once he became Pope, he was able to devote some of the revenue of the papacy to buying Anglican slave boys and educate them in the Christian faith with the intent of sending them back to the British Isles as missionaries. Well, in 596, he selected Augustine, as in St. Augustine, to lead a mission to England. And this is, I love the story about St. Augustine. So St. Augustine had this impression from the Roman Catholic centricity of thinking that this was a land full of pagans, and reasonably, Christianity had been driven back into the west and the north, into Ireland and Scotland and Wales, and the main bulk of England was now pagan again because of at that point in time, Christianity had not come to the Angles or the northern Germany where the invasions came from. So St. Augustine was concerned about this trip, and he had a lot of anxiety and trepidation about going. He was convinced he would get there and he would be slaughtered by a bunch of pagans who didn't want to hear the message of Christ. And he had these 40 monks making this trip from Rome. But what he did not account for was the fact that, so the king in England, in the Canterbury area, was King Ethelbert. And King Ethelbert had already been married for some time to Queen Bertha. And Queen Bertha was from France, who was already very Roman Catholic. And in marrying Queen Bertha, he had to agree to allow her to have a church. And there was an old church there in Canterbury. We don't even know how old it was, probably the 200s. It was certainly from the Roman era. And so Queen Bertha was allowed to have a church. And so they were all familiar. They were all familiar with Christianity. And Augustine and his 40 monks thought that they were going to show up on the British shores and be slaughtered. They were actually warmly received by King Ethelbert and by the local population. And so his success was easier than he thought, than he anticipated. And he actually became a bishop within 8 months. And King Ethelbert granted him 2 pieces of land. And one piece of land is where the Canterbury Cathedral currently is today. And the other piece of land is where the chapel that his wife had been worshiping at for several years. And it is currently also a church. So those 2 pieces of land that King Ethelbert in the 6th century gave to St. Augustine and therefore the church are still used today by the church. And that church where Queen Bertha worshipped is the oldest English-speaking church in the world, and it's still there today. It's been a continuous parish since 597.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Do they have a parish Bible with all the baptisms and stuff?
They probably have several, right?
Yeah.
So when my wife and I went down there, probably about a year and a half ago, we made this trip. Don't remember the exact date, actually. Well, we went down there. Hang on just a second. My mother-in-law's at the door. Oh, So when we went down to Canterbury, and you know, as I mentioned before, to me this was a pilgrimage to me. And when I do these talks, hey, did you take those pictures? And I get a lot of pictures off the internet, but so here are some pictures that I actually took with my iPhone. So we're in Canterbury, and we want to go to the world's oldest English-speaking church.
David, we're not seeing any of the pictures.
You're not?
No, we're not seeing anything on the screen.
Nothing's on the screen?
You.
Well, you
What's that?
you're on the screen, but no picture.
You're on the screen with your well-kept beard, but that's all we have.
Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah,
You can see Monk Gregory on the screen.
Right.
Yeah. So we were talking about Monk Gregory, and he was surprised by the reception. And okay, here we go. You see the picture of those little gate there?
Yeah.
Excellent, fantastic. So this is from when Veronica and I went to Canterbury, and this is one of the highest places in Canterbury. It may be the highest hill. I don't know if it's the highest hill or not, but it's certainly the highest hill within viewable distance from the hill itself. So it's a fairly high place. We walked up there from the downtown Canterbury, and this is the gate as we're approaching St. Martin's, which is the oldest English-speaking church in the world continuous parish since 597. And it's really beautiful.
You look around that cemetery, Tom?
What's that?
Did you look around the cemetery at all? I'm sure there's some old gravestones there.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, you couldn't even read a lot of them. They were just weather worn. Who knows how old they were? And I think there were graves on top of graves, really. And as hopefully you see in the picture now, there's some of them in the front on the approach of the church.
Yeah.
And then the day we got there, it was closed, so we walked around it taking pictures. But there was a sign on the door saying that the next day there was a prayer service. So, absolutely we put that as a priority for the next day. We went there, and so this is the interior. We went there for our prayer service, and you see the priest there on the right-hand picture, talking to some.
No, not yet.
Huh?
There we go.
Yes, now we do.
Okay.
You see it now.
So there were about a dozen people there, and I think Veronica and I and were the only tourists. So most of them were actual parishioners. And it was basic Anglican prayer service, praying for the congregation members. But that center part of the church that you see that's narrower, that's the original part of the church. That's where Queen Bertha used to go to pray and worship. And the rest was added on later in time. In fact, this is a photograph I took from a sign out front of the church, showing you some of the history of the church. And that let me get my pointer back up.
The Roman one.
No,
back here.
on this.
The
Roman 300. And the Saxons here.
So this area here was the original church, that little tiny spot. And 200s or 300s, we're not even sure how old it was. It was from the Roman era. And that's this part here, the little vestibule where the table and the communion are done. So that's from the 200s or 300s. And that's where Queen Bertha got to worship for over a decade before the priests came. And I wish I had taken a better picture of the sign, because I didn't realize I'd be using it in the future. So Augustine arrives in 597. That's 17 years after Bertha started using that church to pray. So she had almost 2 decades of just going to this tiny little chapel, and that's where she practiced her Christianity in this pagan world, dominated by Saxons and Angles that invaded England and turned it back from Christianity into a pagan world. But as I said earlier, they were actually very friendly and receptive. They had heard about Jesus. I mean, their queen was a Christian. And so, pagans have multiple gods. So, Jesus was just another god to them. So they were very warmly received and not massacred like St. Augustine thought they would be. And then you see, as time goes on, 400, 500 years later, Norman conquest builds as the Normans invaded, and the Normans were Christians from northern France. They expanded the church. So the church has been here forever, and it's really cool. I tell you what, it's really cool to see the world's oldest English-speaking church, and knowing that it's been a continuous parish for so long. There is a sense of awe being there, and I love Canterbury. I would totally go back. Veronica and I have done a lot of traveling, and there's a couple places in the world that I would go back over and over if I could, if I had the time and money to do it. I think I would go to Canterbury every year. It was a really cool little city. And so back on the idea that St. Augustine came there from Rome to bring Roman Catholic Christianity to England, viewing it as a pagan, heathen place with no Christianity, which was incorrect. It was ill-advised. Don't know if I really blame him or criticize him. That's just the viewpoint that the church had at that point. But so he gets there, and there are still priests and bishops. And of course, who were the priests and bishops on the British Isles? But Celtic Christians. I'm going to let the dogs out, because I don't know if you hear them. Oh, good Lord. Hang on, let me let the dogs out.
Let the dogs out.
Now we know who let the dogs out. David.
See if he comes back singing that song.
I think it's St. Dave.
I think he went with him.
Okay, so so the Celtic Christianity was, before Roman Catholic Christianity tried to come back to England, and the Celtic Christianity was always there. It was there from the beginning, and of course the Saxons and the Angles drove them back in the west and the north, but they were still there. And there were bishops and priests in England right from the beginning. They were invited to the Council of Nicaea in 325. So it was recognized that Christianity was in England. But somehow, we didn't have cell phones and fax machines and internet. So, Rome had lost sight of that and saw England as a pagan heathen place and sent St. Augustine. But so he got there, and there were still priests and bishops there, and they had their own way of doing things. And, the British Isles Christianity has always had its own unique viewpoint and blend on things. And it's really a true combination, a true blending of East and West Christianity. If we look at the history of Christianity and the split between East and West in 1066, that really, we say 1066 because it became formalized, but had been going on for probably 600 years. This gradual shifting of East and West Christianity. And I think that Christianity on British Isles has historically been one of the best places that looked at both viewpoints, that incorporated theology and philosophy and practices from both East and West. And I think this is, to me, one of the really cool things about being Episcopalian / Anglican is that we have historically always looked at globally both sides of Christianity, both the East and the West, and we've incorporated that into who we are. And we always have. And the Celtic Christianity, if you look at their theology and philosophy, has always incorporated that, has always included main ideas and theologies from both opposites of Christianity, both the East and the West. And so Augustine gets there, and he thought he was going to be massacred, and he wasn't. And he's warmly received and becomes a bishop fairly quickly. And he writes a letter to the Pope saying, these bishops and priests here in England are doing some things that are a little bit different in liturgy. What should I do about that? And the Pope answers back, and this is a quote from what he said, he advised Augustine to make his own right, choosing what he found to be most pious, religious, and correct in the customs of other churches and adapting them to the needs of the local English people. And I thought that was really cool in 597, where there's a mindset of the Roman Catholic to say, we are right, this is the way to do things, for the Pope to actually say, you know, we don't have to all be exactly 100% the same in the way we do liturgy. If there's some minor differences, and really that's all there were, is minor differences, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You're still honoring God. You're still worshiping God, still honoring Jesus. It's okay to have some minor differences, and whatever works for the local people is what you want to do. And I think we still have that kind of a mindset today in the Episcopalian/Anglican Church, that there's okay to be some minor differences in the way we do liturgy. One of the things I read on the history of this time was that some historians say that Gregory's most unwise move was giving Augustine authority over the British bishops, because they had kept Christianity alive in the British Isles for centuries, and really there was some tension between the Celtic Christian priests and bishops and the new influx of the influence of Rome. And I think that tension has always been there. And, you know, when King Henry VIII separated from the Roman Catholic Church not for philosophical or theological reasons, but King Henry VIII separated from the church for political and financial reasons. There was, even though that was King Henry VIII's motivation, there were priests and bishops in the church in England who still had those Celtic roots, who also saw that as an opportunity for theological and philosophical reasons, and their dissatisfaction or dissension with the Roman Catholic authority over them. And even though by that point they'd been going on for centuries, there was still that basic core root of who they are, their identity as Celtic Christians on the British Isles, and they had been there from the beginning, even before Roman influence. So here are some more pictures that I took with my iPhone, and this is the gate entering into the wall around Canterbury Cathedral. And in my trips to Europe, I have to say, I think the Baroque churches are I love the Baroque style churches. They're just absolutely beautiful. You feel like you're in heaven looking at those. But the Gothic style churches also have their own type of majesty and beauty. They're so enormous. They are overwhelming. And it's a different kind of beauty. It's not the artistic, beautiful gold and beautiful paintings that you have in Baroque. And I've taken longer to grow to love the Gothic style. The Gothic style is a majesty of its own. It's not as much as a beauty as it is a majesty. You're inside a Gothic cathedral, and it is overwhelming, the size. You know, it's just, you can't even understand it till you get inside there and experience one. Unfortunately, when we went to England, everything had scaffolding up. The good news is they're taking care of their buildings. The bad news as tourists, as we scaffolding in front of Parliament and Big Ben and the cathedral, the Canterbury Cathedral. But, you know, I'm grateful to have been there in person and been able to experience it. And so these are some of the grounds around Canterbury Cathedral. And I'm pretty sure these were cloisters. As you see, there's a few people buried there. I couldn't go out there. It was restricted, so I don't know who's buried there. And this is in the cathedral. The picture on the left is the tower, and that's just magnificent architecture, just beautiful. And that stained glass window was just one of many It's in front of some steps leading up to the main sanctuary. And it was truly breathtaking. And the cathedral is enormous, and there were lots of tour groups and parishioners there and people worshiping. We were unable to take, we did go to the cathedral for communion in one of the crypts in the basement. There were no, in the main sanctuary, there was nothing going on while we were there. But I was grateful to take communion at the cathedral. To me, it honestly is one of the highlights of my life, going to Canterbury and taking communion there with my wife. And this is in the main sanctuary. And this is a picture of the choir room. And the pipe organ. And also, this is attached to the cathedral. It was ruins of St. Augustine's monastery. And you walk around Canterbury, and there's other ruins too. There's ruins of the St. Augustine's monastery, and there was also an abbey that are ruins. And honestly, looking at the ruins of the pictures, I'm not sure which is which anymore. Now, you know, I'm the picture taker in the family, which means there's a lot of pictures of my wife, and including from her side, which she probably is not happy about, but you know, without anybody in it, but sometimes you just can't. Oh, this is the West Gate. West Gate, now there were 1.7 gates in Canterbury. It was a walled city. And this is the only gate that's surviving. Let me look at my notes, see the 60 foot tall, and it's built in 1379.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, isn't it amazing? And cars drive through there, and it's the only surviving gate from the second or once there as a walled city. And the wall is mostly intact, and there's Veronica walking on the wall. We went for a walk over the wall. The majority of the wall is still there, not all of it, so obviously it's not, you know, a walled city protecting you from Viking invaders anymore. But the wall is turned into a walkway, which is a really beautiful, nice, pleasant walkway. And we walked around the whole thing. And there's some pictures of downtown. It's a large area, pedestrian only, no vehicles. Good old European medieval shops, including one shop that one hotel where Charles Dickens liked to stay and wrote some of his stories. And we saw several of these boats going through the river. Some were carrying school children to school, quite obviously with their backpacks, and some were tour groups. And
A gondolier.
what's that?
A gondolier right there taking you under the bridge.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. Yeah, for sure. And so the other thing to look at, and I know it's going to be 10 o'clock already, so we'll close off with Canterbury here. But